Hello, everybody, and welcome to History Bite number 185, dated February 14th, 2021. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. This History Bite is entitled The Baltimore Plot Against President Lincoln. Upon election to the presidency in November of 1860, of course, Abraham Lincoln became the first Republican ever elected president of the United States. A core part of the Republican platform was their opposition to the expansion of slavery, not to destroy slavery where it already existed. With that in mind, however, most southern states did not trust him in this regard, and we see the beginning of the southern states withdrawing from the Union, which would ultimately lead to the American Civil War. Thus, President Lincoln was certainly not a very popular guy in the South. And in Maryland, although not as vehemently unpopular as he was in South Carolina, he certainly was not exactly embraced. All right. On the 11th of February, 1861, President Lincoln left Illinois to begin a 70-town and city whistle-stop tour that would ultimately end with his arrival in Washington, D.C. on the 23rd of February. The last leg of that journey would be in Baltimore, Maryland. It would be, as a matter of fact, his only stop in slave territory. His visit to Baltimore would be the last city he would visit before arriving, obviously, in the nation's capital. All right. So with that, there was obviously great concern for the security of the president, even though he certainly did not feel his security was in danger. We know this, but most around him obviously knew the peril that he was in, especially traveling by train. As such, he traveled with military personnel as well as his personal bodyguard, Ward Hill Lyman, all right, who certainly always had the president's best interests in mind. Samuel Morse Felton, who was the director of the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railroad, PWB, a railroad which no longer exists, was worried as a result of possible attacks and terrorism against his railroad facilities, his tracks, his stations throughout the Pennsylvania and Baltimore region. All right, with a lot of secessionist sentiment in Maryland, it wasn't exactly a sealed deal that his own railroad installations would be safe from possible attacks. All right, so he enlisted the service of a very prominent detective named Allen Pinkerton, who, by way of spies and other covert individuals, moved about in the Baltimore area to make sure, so to speak, that there weren't any potential plots to blow up train stations or destroy tracks, or certainly included in that, potentially imperil the security of the President of the United States, the incoming President of the United States. All right. So it is by way of these secret spies that, frequented bars and taverns and other places of social gathering, that Detective Pinkerton would meet with a stockbroker named James Luckett, who in turn would introduce Pinkerton to an Italian man named Cipriano Ferrandini, who was allegedly the head of a plot to assassinate Lincoln once he arrived in Baltimore. As stated before, President Lincoln was scheduled to arrive in Baltimore on February 23rd, 1861. He was scheduled to arrive via the Calvert Street Station, which was the southern terminus of the North Central Railroad. Okay. From there, he was to travel from the Calvert Street Station down to the Camden Station, continue his journey on the B&O tracks to Washington, D.C. All right. At that time, cities did not allow railroads to typically run through the city center due to fire hazards and other potential harm to businesses as well as animals as well. So you would often have to transfer from one station to another to continue your journey from a city to another city. So once President Lincoln would have gotten off the train at the Calvert Street station and traveled by carriage down to the Camden station, which is still an active station in Baltimore to this very day, he would have allegedly been surrounded by an angry secessionist mob, people with knives and guns, and hopefully one of them would have banked on getting close enough to the president to either stab him or shoot him point blank. All right. So with the information obtained from these individuals, Pinkerton telegraphed Norman Judd, a very close confidant of President Lincoln, and traveled to Philadelphia himself to divulge all this information to both Judd and Samuel Felton. So it would be this was the first time that Lincoln himself would meet Pinkerton, who, along with the support of Judd, urged the president to cancel all further activities and proceed immediately to Washington, D.C. for his own safety. And Lincoln, being, very committed man, didn't want to cancel the rest of his travel plans. And it would not be until he received information directly from the War Department via Lieutenant General Winfield Scott of a plot on his life that Lincoln finally saw the light and listened to Pinkerton. All right. So with that being said, once he had finished his stop in Harrisburg, he returned to Philadelphia, where, disguised in a beaver hat and a shawl, he boarded a train to Baltimore at 11 o'clock p.m. on the 22nd of February, 1861. All right. To ensure that no information went from Baltimore to Philadelphia about Lincoln's coming to the city, telegraph lines were cut. All right. So Lincoln on that train arrived in Baltimore at 3:30 a.m. On the 23rd of February, 1861, at the President Street Station, which was the southern terminus of the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railroad. At that location today, 601 South President Street, stands the Baltimore Civil War Museum. Okay? So upon arriving at the President Street Station, Lincoln's car had to be hitched to horses, where he would then travel across the city via existing lines that would take him on horseback, take him to the Camden station, where at that point his car would be attached to a train on the B&O Railroad tracks, and he would continue his journey south to Washington, D.C. Once again, railroad tracks, steam engines did not run through cities at that time due to potential fire hazards. So Lincoln had to get out of his PWB train and board a horse-drawn train that would take him across the city to the Camden station, where the car was reattached to an actual local steam engine, where the journey would be continued to Washington, D.C. Something that was accomplished, and Lincoln thus passed through the city of Baltimore completely secret and under the cover of darkness. He passed through the city in secret, totally unobserved and totally undiscovered by anybody, boarded his train to the nation's capital and arrived there at 6 a.m. on the morning of February 23rd, 1861. All right. So, with that being said, any potential plot on the president's life had been destroyed. After all, the president had passed through the city completely undiscovered, and with that, the train that did arrive later on in the day that the president was supposed to be on was still in fact carrying his wife and children, but they had already alighted the train several blocks earlier, for their own safety as well. All right, so President Lincoln thus made it through the city of Baltimore safely and unscathed, thank goodness. arriving in D.C. and, of course, being inaugurated on the 4th of March, 1861. All right. So the alleged plot against his life couldn't take form. So despite all that, on February 23rd, lots of people had gathered. He obviously did have some friends in Baltimore. Lots of people had gathered at the President Street station to greet the president. And they were obviously very disappointed when they learned he had already passed through the city. Believe it or not, folks, this was something that continued to plague Lincoln for the rest of his presidency. He was often viewed as very cowardly for secretly sneaking through Baltimore in the middle of the night to avoid a potential assassination plot. Now, something like that today would obviously be a normal course to protect the president's life. Back then, that was considered very, very weak and, full of cowardice to put one's safety over honor, and of course, we have a whole different thought pattern today where safety obviously goes well before honor. All right. So that being said, cartoons continued to make fun of the president, making him seem like he was altogether unfit to be commander-in-chief. After all, he'll run from anything. But, of course, we know that Lincoln was anything but a weak, cowardice-laced commander-in-chief. Lincoln was, in fact, a very bold, assertive, and honorable commander-in-chief who led this nation through its most difficult period, and did so until his unfortunate assassination and death on the 14th and 15th of April, 1861. All right. President thus gave his life for his nation. All right. With his death on April 15th, 1865, excuse me, I said 1861, Andrew Johnson, his vice president, would ascend to the presidency. So that is the Baltimore plot against the life of President Lincoln. It's a lot covered for sure. If you have any questions or controversies, just leave them down below. I'll be happy to answer them. And one more thing before I go, there are lots of individuals who don't see this threat as something that should have been taken seriously. But my personal opinion on the matter is that you can never be too safe, too secure. Better to be safe than sorry. And the president did, in fact, make it through here unscathed. So that alone suggests that they did the right thing. So again, any questions or controversies, leave them down below. I'll be happy to answer them. If you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, just hit that little red subscribe button right there and we'll be in business. Thanks again for listening. Take care, stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next bite. Peace.